Hi, I'm Ross Maynard, and this is the history of the railway works in Springburn in Glasgow. The parish of Springburn was incorporated into the city of Glasgow in 1872. At that time, Springburn was the location of the world's largest concentration of railway carriage and locomotive works. And this is the story I will tell in this video. I hope you enjoy it. This is the Google map for Springburn today. It's a typical city suburb with a population of around 12,000, and it's a mainly residential area with a large retail park and many small businesses. Why did it become a major hub for railway manufacture? Because it was in on the railway revolution pretty much from the start. Let's have a quick look at the timeline of events. The Forth and Clyde Canal arrived just to the northwest of Springburn in 1775. It brought goods and minerals in from the east of the country. But the real prize for Springburn was the Monkland Canal, completed in 1794. It brought coal into Glasgow from the rich Lanarkshire coalfields. The availability of cheap coal brought industry to the area, and specifically Charles Tennant's chemical works, soon to be the largest in the world, in 1799. The Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway terminated in Springburn in 1831, bringing the price of coal down further. Its arrival in the area was no coincidence, as we shall see. In 1842, the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway was opened. Cowlairs Locomotive Works was built to provide engines and carriages for this line, and was opened in 1841. It was the first of the locomotive and carriage works in the area. The Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway was leased to the Caledonian Railway in 1846, opening Springburn up to the whole rail network of the Caledonian. The Caledonian Railway built the famous Rollox locomotive works and carriage and wagon works in 1856. Springburn became a centre of excellence for locomotive and carriage construction, and the Hyde Park works opened in 1861, with the Atlas works opening in 1888. But Springburn was never a wealthy part of town, and I will tell of the Barony poorhouse later in this video too. Here then is a map of Springburn in 1795. It's reproduced with the permission of the National Library of Scotland, as all the maps in this video are, and their site is a great resource for old maps. Have a look at it. We can see there an area called Rollox, which I've underlined in red, and it lies on the Monkland Canal, which I've marked in blue. Notice also some sort of manor house called Cowlairs. In 50 years that'll be a massive railway works. But in 1795 there is no industry at all in Springburn. It's not even a place in its own right, just a few farms and settlements scattered about. Things begin to change for the Springburn area with the arrival of the Forth and Clyde Canal. Construction of this privately funded canal was approved by Parliament in 1768. The original idea was to build a ship canal, but that proved too expensive. The canal runs from the Firth of Forth at a place now called Grangemouth, which is 24 miles from Edinburgh, and the canal arrived to the north-west of Springburn in 1775. The canal brought merchants and goods to the area, and that means jobs and business opportunities. Government funds allowed the Forth and Clyde Canal to be completed to Bowling in 1790, and the canal was bought by the Caledonian Railway in 1867 and nationalised in 1948, and sadly closed in 1963. Thankfully, £84 million of Millennium funding allowed the canal to reopen as a leisure resource in 2001. Even more important to the growth of Springburn was the Monkland Canal, since it comes right into the heart of the area and brought cheap coal. Demand for coal in Glasgow was rising as the Industrial Revolution took hold. The Forth and Clyde Canal could only provide limited supplies, since it does not pass through good coal-producing areas. Transport of coal from the rich Lanarkshire coalfields by horse and cart was expensive. The answer was to build a canal, and work started on the Monkland Canal in 1770, managed by James Watt, the famous steam engine builder. He experienced many difficulties in construction and left the project in 1773 to pursue more profitable ambitions. The canal finally reached Coatbridge in 1794, and the price of coal in Glasgow dropped dramatically. Sadly, the Monkland Canal was closed in 1954, and the M8 motorway now runs over much of its route, though a section of the canal does remain in Coatbridge. The availability of cheap coal in Springburn attracted one of Scotland's most industrious entrepreneurs. Charles Tennant was born in Ayrshire in 1768. His family were farmers, and they knew Robert Burns. In fact, Charles is mentioned in one of his letters. Charles Tennant was apprenticed to a master weaver and became interested in the bleaching of textiles. He left his apprenticeship to pursue his dream and patented bleaching powder in 1799. With investment partners, he immediately bought land on the Monkland Canal at Springburn and built a factory. He became rich, and by the 1830s his chemical works was the largest in the world, covering over 100 acres and employing 1,000 staff. Charles Tennant was also a driving force behind the Great Reform Act of 1832, which extended voting rights and radically reformed parliamentary seats. And Tennant was also one of the early promoters of steam railways, as we shall see shortly. Tennant died in 1838, and the chemical works closed in 1964. It was then part of ICI. High-rise flats were built on the site in the 1960s, but these have now been demolished and modern housing has been built on the site. Charles Tennant was the force behind the creation of the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway, one of the first railways in Scotland to use steam engines. By 1832, Tennant's chemical works was consuming 30,000 tonnes of coal a year. Keen to reduce the cost of supply, he became the chief sponsor of the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway, which would bring coal from Coatbridge and the coalfields around it directly to Glasgow, and coincidentally passing his factory. Construction started in 1827, and the line opened in 1831. It introduced a Robert Stephenson-built locomotive in June 1831, only 1 month behind the Monkland and Kirkintilloch Railway, which had the first steam locomotive in Scotland, and actually joins with the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway close to Coatbridge. The Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway originally terminated at a depot next to Charles Tennant's chemical works, but it was extended to Buchanan Street Station in 1849. Services were not moved to Glasgow Queen Street Station until 1966, when Buchanan Street Station was closed and demolished. The Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway was leased to the Caledonian Railway in 1846, giving them access to Glasgow that they so desperately desired. The line was acquired by the Caledonian Railway in 1868. Passenger services still use the route of the line to Coatbridge via steps. 190 years of continuous service. Time for another map, I think. And this is Thomas Kyle's map of Glasgow from 1842. We see the Monkland Canal in blue at the bottom, and Charles Tennant's chemical works right next to the track of the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway in red. At the time, that line terminated in Springburn. The red line in the centre of the map is the extension of the Garnkirk and Glasgow line, which was not completed at the time of this map, and which would take the line to a terminus called Buchanan Street Station in 1849. The line's terminus was moved to Queen Street Station in 1966, alongside the Edinburgh and Glasgow line. The site of Buchanan Street Station is now owned by Glasgow Caledonian University, but the building on the site housed the headquarters of ScotRail until 1994. Last time I visited a few years ago, there was still a Network Rail office on one floor of the building. The red line on the left of the map is the Edinburgh to Glasgow Railway line, which enters a tunnel in Springburn through to its terminus at Glasgow Queen Street Station. More on that shortly. The Edinburgh to Glasgow Railway was authorised by Act of Parliament in 1838 and opened in 1842. It is 46 miles long, running from Glasgow Queen Street Station to Edinburgh Haymarket. It was extended to Waverley Station in Edinburgh in 1846. The original journey took 2.5 hours with 10 intermediate station stops. The journey now takes around 52 minutes, with up to 5 stops depending on the time of the train. There are trains every 15 minutes in each direction. Passenger demand for the line was 3 times that expected, and by 1850 the company needed 58 locomotives and 216 carriages. The incline from Cowlairs in Springburn to Queen Street Station was so steep that cable haulage had to be used until 1909, when steam engines were finally powerful enough to manage the slope. The Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway Company built Cowlairs Works in Springburn to produce locomotives, carriages and wagons for the line. The works was opened in 1841. It was taken over, along with the Edinburgh to Glasgow line, by the North British Railway Company in 1865, and the works was nationalised in 1948. During the Second World War, Cowlairs Works produced gliders for the D-Day landings. The site closed in 1994 and is now an industrial park, including a large whisky bond. The former sidings for the works are the site of a Network Rail signalling centre. This map of Glasgow of 1859 by Joseph Swan shows the Monkland Canal, marked in blue, and Charles Tennant's chemical works circled in red. St Rollox Locomotives Works would be newly built at this time and is circled in green, with the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway running beside it. By this time the line was leased by the Caledonian Railway. Cowlairs Works is off the map to the north, along the line of the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway. This first edition Ordnance Survey map of 1859 gives a nice overview of the area at the time. We see Cowlairs Works at the top of the map on the red Edinburgh to Glasgow Railway line. We see the Monkland Canal, which I've marked in blue, and Charles Tennant's chemical works at the nexus between the canal and the red Garnkirk to Glasgow Railway. St Rollox Railway Works is also marked. Notice also the Barony poorhouse circled in red. Let's take a quick sidestep into its history. Barony poorhouse, called Barn Hill poorhouse in some documents, opened in 1853 and had 160 beds. Able-bodied men living there were obliged to make up to 350 bundles of firewood per day, or break 500 weight of stones per day to earn their bed and gruel, and I'm sure it was gruel. Female inmates worked in the laundry or on sewing work. The workhouse was reconstructed in 1904 and became the largest in Scotland. The site was operated as a care home for vagrants until 1978 and was demolished in 1988. The Barony was also connected with the Woodley Lunatic and Pauper Asylum, which lies next to the Edinburgh to Glasgow Railway line at Lenzie. It opened in 1875 and by 1915 held 1,300 patients. The hospital closed in 1992. We saw St Rollox Locomotive Works marked on the 1859 maps. The St Rollox Locomotive Works and St Rollox Carriage and Wagon Works were built in 1856 by the Caledonian Railway. The works lay on the route of the Garnkirk and Glasgow Railway, which at that time was operated by the Caledonian Railway. St Rollox became the main northern loco and carriage works of the London, Midland and Scottish Railway in 1923 and employed 4,000 people at that time. It became part of British Rail in 1948 and has been owned by several private operators since the 1990s. The site was largely demolished in the 1990s and now houses a Costco warehouse, a huge Tesco supermarket and other retailers. The small remainder of the St Rollox Works, a maintenance depot, closed in 2019. It was the last remaining railway works in Springburn. By 1900, Springburn was the world's largest concentration of railway, locomotive and carriage works. This Ordnance Survey map of 1900 shows St Rollox marked with the red circle. Cowlairs Works is marked with the light blue circle and Tennant's Chemical Works is marked with the green circle. I've also marked the Barony poorhouse with the black circle. But this map also shows the 2 other great railway works of the area. The Hyde Park Works is marked in orange and the Atlas Works in purple. Let's talk about their history now. Walter Neilson and James Mitchell opened a factory in Hyde Park Street next to the River Clyde in Glasgow in 1837. They manufactured marine and stationary engines. Spotting opportunities in the rail industry, they began to manufacture steam locomotives in 1843 and moved their factory to Springburn in 1861. The Hyde Park works was amalgamated into the North British Locomotive Company in 1903 and was nationalised in 1948. The site closed in 1964 and Glasgow Kelvin College now stands on the site. The Clyde Locomotive Works was formed in 1884 by a former partner in the Hyde Park Works. The works was virtually next door to their competitor. The site was acquired by Sharp, Stewart and Company in 1888 and they renamed it the Atlas Works. Sharp, Stewart and Company had been building locomotives in Manchester since the 1830s but moved to Springburn to be at the centre of locomotive building in the UK. The company had built 5,000 locomotives by the time it was amalgamated with the Hyde Park Works into the North British Locomotive Company in 1903. The Atlas site closed in 1923 and is now an industrial estate. Now we jump forward to 1937 and the Ordnance Survey map here shows Springburn booming. St Rollox Works, circled in red, is vast, as is Cowlairs Works in blue. Hyde Park Works is circled in orange. Atlas Works is still marked on the map and I've circled it in purple, although the locomotive works would have shut by this time. Another company must have taken over the site. I've also marked the Tennant's chemical works in green, and we see that the Barony poorhouse, now called Barnhill Hospital, has greatly expanded by this time. Time for two last maps, and I'm not going to circle the locations on this Ordnance Survey map from 1957, you should know their whereabouts by now. But we can see that Cowlairs Works and St Rollox are still very much operational. Hyde Park Works was nearing closure by this time, as was Charles Tennant's chemical works. And Barnhill Hospital is still clearly operational too. The interesting thing about this map for me is Buchanan Street Station, marked as the terminus for the railway to Coatbridge. Buchanan Street Station operated until 1966, serving not only Coatbridge along the former Garnkirk and Glasgow line, but also trains to Stirling and Aberdeen. Services were moved into Glasgow Queen Street Station in 1966, when Buchanan Street Station was demolished. This final slide shows the modern aerial map of Springburn. It's from Bing Maps and it's copyright Microsoft. The site of Charles Tennant's chemical works, circled in red, is currently derelict, awaiting a new housing development. St Rollox Works, in orange, is now a vast retail site. Hyde Park Locomotive Works has been replaced by Glasgow Kelvin College, circled in light blue, and the Atlas Works, in yellow, is an industrial park. Barnhill Hospital is also gone, replaced by a housing settlement marked in dark blue. Cowlairs is also an industrial park, dominated by a large whisky bond. However, there is a network rail signalling centre at the edge of the green circle. And the Monkland Canal lies under the M8 motorway. The industrial heritage of Springburn is long gone, replaced by housing and light industries more relevant to the 21st century. It's sad in a way, but all things must change. I'm sure that the working conditions in these railway works were very difficult and the noise levels horrendous. The men who worked there probably didn't live into their 70s and beyond as retirees do now. Perhaps it's for the best that they're gone. And to close, I just want to mention the sites that I've used to create this video and their copyright restrictions. The main site I've used for all the mapping is the National Library of Scotland. This is a brilliant resource for old maps, and the mapping can be used for non-commercial purposes under Creative Commons by attribution rules. Railmap Online is useful to identify the routes of old railways, and railscot.co.uk offers a wealth of information about our railway and industrial heritage. The other sites listed may be of use to you too. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.